He moved his new wife into my home, and he did it like he was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful he'd chosen my place as the stage for his fresh start, while I was still standing in the ruins of the old one. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from my doorbell camera. A bright Thursday morning in a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis. The kind of day where the sky looks scrubbed clean and the air smells like cold metal and pine. I was already running late for work, hair still damp, travel mug in my hand, when my phone buzzed with that familiar alert. Motion detected. I glanced down, half expecting a delivery driver. Instead, my stomach dropped so hard it felt like my body forgot how to hold itself up. Caleb, my ex-husband, standing on my porch like he belonged, not alone. Beside him, a woman in a cream coat, holding a garment bag like she was arriving at a hotel. She had a wedding ring that flashed when she adjusted the strap on her purse. And behind them, a moving truck. Not a small one. A real truck. The kind with ramps and dolly straps and men in uniforms who don't ask questions if the paperwork looks official. I stood frozen in my entryway, keys digging into my palm, coffee cooling in my grip. Because nothing prepares you for the moment you realize someone is about to move into your life, without your permission. I'm Mara Ellison. I'm 40. And this is the story of how my ex tried to erase me by replacing me, room by room, in the very house I built. The house wasn't a dream home, but it was mine. A 2-story, cedar-sided place with a wide front window that caught the sunset, in a backyard big enough for a garden I actually kept alive. I bought it before Caleb, before the marriage, before the promises, before I learned that some people don't fall in love with you, they fall in love with what you have. I remember closing day like a photograph. My father in the bank lobby, hands shoved into his coat pockets, pretending he wasn't emotional. My agent sliding papers across the table, cheerful, fast. Me signing my name so many times my hand cramped, and still feeling light, like I was stepping into a life that was finally mine to shape. Caleb entered my world a year later, like a man who knew exactly where to stand to look harmless. He was handsome in a polished way, not rugged, not loud. The kind of guy who knew how to laugh at the right time and hold doors for older women. He worked in operations at a logistics company, which sounded stable and responsible, and he made sure everyone knew it. He didn't sweep me off my feet. He just slowly leaned into my life until it felt normal to have him there. A coat in my closet, a toothbrush in my holder, a "we should" in every sentence. We should take a trip. We should invest. We should upgrade the kitchen. We should combine accounts. I didn't notice the pattern until later. Caleb didn't talk about I. He talked about we when he wanted access. The first time he brought up the house, it wasn't aggressive. It was casual, like a man commenting on the weather. "You ever think about adding me to the deed?" he asked one night, swirling ice in his glass. I laughed because it felt absurd. We weren't married yet. We weren't even engaged. But he didn't laugh. He smiled, slow, patient, like he'd planted a seed and was waiting for it to sprout. "I just mean," he added, voice smooth, "if we're building a life together, it's weird to have the biggest asset in only one name. Biggest asset, not home, not safety. Asset. Even then, something in my chest tightened. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself love meant sharing, so I married him. And the sharing began, not the sweet kind, the kind that drains you. At first it was small, Caleb wanted a joint account for bills. Then he wanted his car payment to come out of it. Then he wanted his credit card temporarily paid off because he had big work expenses that would be reimbursed. He always had a reason, always a timeline, always a promise that the money would come back. It never did. And every time I asked about it, he'd tilt his head like I was disappointing him. "Why do you always assume the worst?" he'd ask. "Because I'm watching the pattern," I wanted to say. "Because the math doesn't lie." But instead, I softened. I explained. I compromised. And Caleb grew bolder. The day I realized my marriage wasn't a partnership was the day I opened the mail and found a letter from a credit card company, addressed to me. But I hadn't applied for anything. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten spaghetti and laughed and planned vacations. And I read the letter twice. New account, approved, high limit. My throat went dry. When I confronted Caleb, he didn't panic. He didn't apologize. He sighed, like I'd interrupted his day. "It's for us," he said, rubbing his forehead. "I needed liquidity. Don't make this into a thing." Liquidity, like my identity was a business line. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because I wanted space, because I wanted my body to remember what it felt like to be alone, safe. A year later, we divorced. No dramatic courtroom scene, no screaming, just paperwork, mediation, and a quiet, devastating understanding that I had been slowly handing pieces of myself away. The house stayed mine. It wasn't even a question. My lawyer, Nadine Brooks, sharp eyes, sharp mind, made sure of that. The deed had never changed. The mortgage had never changed. The down payment had come from my savings. Caleb walked away with his car and some furniture, and I walked away with my home. And a long list of lessons I never asked to learn. For a few months after the divorce, Caleb behaved. He sent stiff texts about mail. He picked up a box of tools he'd left in the garage. He made a point of sounding reasonable. And I started to breathe again. I started repainting the bedroom. I started replanting the garden. I started treating my house like it was mine again, instead of a negotiation. Then one day, a friend from work asked me, casually, "So, have you met Caleb's new wife?" New wife? My stomach tightened. "No," I said carefully. "Why?" She blinked. "Oh, I thought you knew. He posted photos. They got married last month." My throat went cold. Married. Last month. I hadn't even known he was engaged. Not that it was my business, but something about the speed, the secrecy, made my skin prickle. Later that night, I looked him up online, and there it was. A wedding photo. Caleb in a tailored suit, smiling that polished smile. A woman beside him, petite, blonde, holding a bouquet like she was holding a trophy. Caption, "New chapter." New chapter. Like I was a closed book he'd shelved without reading. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, not because I missed him, because I recognized something in his eyes. The same calculation, the same confidence of a man who believed he always landed on his feet. Even if someone else broke the fall, 2 weeks later, the moving truck arrived. That bright Thursday, that motion alert, that moment my life tried to tilt again. I didn't rush outside. I didn't scream through the door. I did the first thing my lawyer trained me to do. I documented. I hit record on the camera feed. I screenshotted the time. I zoomed in on the truck logo. Then I called Nadine. She answered on the second ring. "Mara," she said, already alert. "What's going on?" "My ex is on my porch," I whispered, "with a moving truck and a woman." I think it's his new wife. There was a pause. Then Nadine's voice turned razor sharp. Do not let them in. I'm not, I said, though my hands were shaking. Good, she replied. Do you have your divorce decree and the deed paperwork accessible? Yes, I said, because Nadine had made me keep copies in a folder like it was a shield. Get it, she instructed, and call the police non-emergency line if they attempt entry. This is not a civil misunderstanding. This is trespass. Trespass. The word landed in me like a firm hand on my shoulder, because it reminded me this house was not up for debate. I walked to the door, not quickly, not like prey, slow, steady. I opened it with the chain still on. Cold air rushed in. Caleb turned toward me with a smile that made my stomach twist. Mara, he said, like we were old friends. Morning? The woman beside him looked over my shoulder into my house, like she was already imagining curtains. Caleb gestured toward the truck. We're just grabbing a few things. My voice stayed calm. You don't live here? He chuckled soft. Relax. I'm not here to fight. Then he said the sentence that made the world go still. I'm moving Brooke in. Moving Brooke in. As if it was a simple decision he'd made over breakfast. I blinked. Excuse me? Caleb kept smiling, like he was explaining something to a child. Brooke's lease ended, he said, and my apartment is too small. This house is bigger. It makes sense. Makes sense. He said it like logic outranked law. This is my house, I said. Brooke's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't speak. Caleb leaned closer, voice lowering into that intimate tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. We were married, he said. I lived here for years. It's not like I'm a stranger. You're my ex, I replied. He shrugged. And I'm still on the utility bills. I felt my stomach tighten, because that was true. During the divorce, some accounts had stayed in both names while paperwork processed. I'd been meaning to change them. And Caleb knew it. He always knew where the loose thread was. I'm not letting you in, I said. Caleb's smile tightened, but his voice stayed soft. You don't have to let me, he said, and he tapped the folder in his hand. I've got documents. Documents. Paper. That's how men like Caleb weaponize the world. They don't come with fists. They come with folders. He held the papers up like evidence. I have a right to access, he said, and Brooke has a right to live with her husband. My pulse hammered. Brooke shifted beside him, eyes flicking between us. Then she spoke, voice gentle but rehearsed. Hi, Mara, she said. I really don't want this to be weird. Caleb said you understood. Understood. My throat went dry. He lied, I said, blunt. Brooke's cheeks flushed. Caleb's smile didn't move. Mara, he warned quietly, don't do this. Do what? I asked. Make a scene, he said. Make a scene. That's what men like him fear most. Not consequences, exposure. I took a breath. Then I did something Caleb didn't expect. I opened the door just enough to slip my hand out with my own folder. Divorce decree, deed, court-stamped papers. I held them up. These are my documents, I said calmly. They say you have no ownership and no right to occupy this property. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Brooke's gaze dropped to the papers. The moving guys on the sidewalk shifted awkwardly, suddenly very interested in their gloves. Caleb's voice stayed steady, but I could hear the edge. We can do this the easy way, he said, or the hard way. The old me would have flinched. The old me would have tried to negotiate. But Nadine's voice echoed in my head. Paper trail. Stay steady. Make them respect the law. I lifted my phone. "I'm recording," I said. "And if you try to enter my home, I'm calling the police." Brooke's eyes widened. Caleb's smile finally slipped. Just a fraction. He didn't like losing control. He stepped back, as if performing calm for the movers. "Mara," he said, louder now, so the whole sidewalk could hear. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're just trying to move forward." Move forward. He said it like he wasn't dragging my life backward. I watched him for a long second. Then I said, quietly, clearly, "Forward doesn't happen inside my house." Brooke inhaled sharply. Caleb's jaw flexed. He looked at Brooke, then back at me, and his eyes hardened. "Fine," he snapped, dropping the soft voice. "We'll do it legally." I nodded. "Please do." Because I knew something Caleb didn't want to admit. Legal is the one place charm doesn't matter. Caleb turned away, voice sharp to the movers. "Hold tight." Then he pulled Brooke aside, whispering fiercely. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Brooke's face shift. Confusion, then discomfort, then something like fear. That made my stomach twist again, because I realized Brooke might not be a villain. She might be a pawn. And Caleb was using her like he used everyone. Caleb stormed back to the porch. "You're going to regret this," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. I met his gaze through the crack in the door. "No," I said softly. "You are." Then I closed the door, not a slam, just a firm click of a boundary locking into place. My hands shook as soon as the door was shut. My heart pounded. But I didn't open it again. I called the police non-emergency line. I reported an attempted unlawful entry. I gave them my address, my ex-husband's name, and informed them I had court documents proving he had no right to occupy. They said an officer would come by. Then I called Nadine again. "They're still outside," I whispered. "Good," she replied. "Let them stay outside. We're going to make this official." 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled onto my street. Caleb's posture changed instantly. His shoulders squared. His smile returned. He was about to perform. The officer walked up the driveway. A man in his 30s, calm, alert. He spoke to Caleb first. Caleb handed over his folder immediately, like this was the moment he'd been waiting for. The officer skimmed it. Then he looked at my porch camera. I opened the door again, chain still on, and spoke through it. "My name is Mara Ellison," I said. "This is my home. Here is my divorce decree and deed." The officer took my papers, read them slowly, and his expression tightened in that subtle way that meant he understood exactly what was happening. He turned back to Caleb. "Sir," he said, voice firm, "you do not have lawful right to enter this property." Caleb spread his hands. "Officer, I lived here for years. I have personal items inside." The officer nodded slightly. "You can retrieve personal property through civil process or by scheduled standby if the homeowner agrees. You cannot move in a new occupant. You cannot force entry." Caleb's smile tightened. Brooke stood behind him, silent, arms folded tightly around herself. The officer continued, "If you refuse to leave, you may be cited for trespassing." Trespassing. The word hit Caleb like a slap, because it stripped him of his story. It made him what he actually was, an unwanted man on someone else's porch. Caleb's eyes flicked to the movers, then to the neighbors peeking through blinds, then back to the officer. He forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous." The officer didn't react. Caleb's face hardened. He grabbed Brooke's wrist and pulled her slightly back. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "We're leaving. The movers looked relieved. They climbed back into the truck. The engine started. Caleb stared at my door as if he could burn through it with resentment. Then he got into his car and drove off. For a long moment, the street was quiet again. Just wind and distant traffic, and the sound of my own breathing. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something heavier. I knew this wasn't over, because Caleb didn't take no as an answer. He took it as a temporary obstacle. That evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "You're going to pay for embarrassing Brooke." Embarrassing Brooke. Not attempting to steal my home. Not bringing a moving truck to my porch. No. His focus was always the same. Control, image, punishment. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Nadine. Then I went through my house, room by room, and changed every lock. Not because Caleb still had a key. I wasn't sure if he did. Because I needed my body to feel safe. The next day, Nadine filed something called a protective order for property access. A legal notice stating Caleb had no right to occupy, no right to enter, and any retrieval of property would happen only through scheduled civil standby. And then she did something else. She pulled a utility records audit, because Caleb had said something that bothered her. I'm still on the utility bills. That wasn't just a loose thread, it was a hook. Nadine's office called me on Monday. "Mara," her assistant said, "we found something." My stomach clenched. What? They sent an email. I opened it, and my breath caught. A change of billing address request had been filed. 2 weeks ago. In my name, but not by me. It redirected certain statements, electric, water, to a P.O. box. A P.O. box registered under Brooke's name. My skin went cold. Because that wasn't just Caleb trying to move in. That was Caleb trying to quietly take control of the paperwork that made the house function. If he controlled utilities, he could create residency. He could create a story that Brooke lived there. And stories become evidence if you let them sit long enough. Nadine's voice came on the phone, tight. "He's building a fraud trail," she said. "He wants to claim occupancy." My heart hammered. "How do we stop it?" I asked. "By cutting every link," Nadine replied. "Today, all utilities, all accounts, all mail forwarding, and we file a fraud complaint with each provider." That day became a checklist. Not because I liked lists, because I refused to be surprised again. I spent my lunch break on hold with utility companies, verifying identity, changing passwords, adding notes. No changes without in-person verification. Ex-spouse has attempted unauthorized access. I went to the post office and filed an identity theft report for the mail redirection. I installed additional cameras. I updated my home insurance with a note about harassment. And I started carrying a folder in my car like a woman who understood something ugly. Sometimes your peace depends on paperwork. Meanwhile, Brooke started reaching out. Not to me directly, to a mutual friend. A friend texted me, hesitant. "Brooke says Caleb told her you were keeping the house from him, and that he still had rights. She's confused." Confused. My chest tightened, because that meant Brooke wasn't in on it. She was being fed a version, a story where Caleb was the victim, and I was the bitter ex. That story was his favorite costume. Nadine advised me not to contact Brooke. "Let your attorney do it," she said. "Anything you say could be twisted." So Nadine sent Brooke's legal address a letter, a simple statement of facts. Caleb had no ownership, no occupancy rights. Any attempt to claim residency would be treated as fraud. 2 days later, Brooke showed up alone. No moving truck, no Caleb, just Brooke in her cream coat, standing on my porch with red eyes and a nervous grip on her phone. I watched through the camera for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore her. Part of me wanted to open the door and finally say what I had been holding in my throat for years. You don't understand who you married. But I also knew the danger of giving Caleb another angle. So I did the safest thing. I opened the door, but I stayed behind the chain. Brooke's voice trembled. "Hi," she said softly. "Mara?" "Yes," I replied. She swallowed. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Caleb told me you were moving out and that the court gave him access. He said the police would just help with the move." I stared at her. I believed her. Because her eyes weren't triumphant. They were scared. I kept my voice calm. He lied. Brooke nodded quickly, tears spilling. I know that now. She looked down, then up again, like she was forcing herself to say something hard. He also told me you were unstable, she admitted. That you were vindictive. There it was. The narrative. The weapon. Brooke's hands shook as she held out her phone. "I found these," she said, "in his email. I wasn't trying to snoop, I needed to understand. And I saw..." She paused, breathing fast. "I saw drafts of documents, utility changes, a template letter about residency, and notes." Notes. My stomach dropped. "What notes?" I asked carefully. Brooke's voice went small. "He wrote that if he could establish that I lived here for 30 days, he could force you into a legal fight. That it would pressure you to settle." Pressure you. Settle. My pulse hammered. He wasn't trying to move Brooke in because he loved her. He was trying to use her like a battering ram. Brooke's voice broke. "I didn't know. I swear. I thought I was starting a life with him." Her face crumpled, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. Brooke wasn't my enemy. She was the next version of me. The next woman Caleb would drain, until she learned. I took a slow breath. "Brooke," I said quietly, "I believe you." She looked up, startled. I continued, "But I can't let you in. I need you to understand that. Not because I hate you, because I have to protect myself." She nodded, wiping tears. "I understand." Then she did something I didn't expect. She opened her purse and pulled out a small stack of printed papers. She held them up, hands trembling. "I printed everything," she whispered. "Emails, notes, the utility requests. I thought maybe your lawyer could use them." My throat tightened, because that was evidence. And evidence is power. I nodded slowly. "Give them to my lawyer," I said. "Not to me. That keeps you safe too." Brooke nodded. Then she took a step back, as if she'd already decided something. "I'm leaving him," she said, voice shaking but firm. My heart beat hard. "Be careful," I said. Brooke's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something in them that wasn't confusion. It was clarity. "I will," she whispered. Then she walked down my steps and toward her car. Alone. That night Nadine called me, her voice tight with focused satisfaction. "Brooke's documents are real," she said, "and they're damaging." "Enough to stop him?" I asked. Nadine exhaled. "Enough to show intent. Intent matters, because it changes everything. Caleb wasn't mistaken. He wasn't confused. He was planning, deliberately, strategically, to force me into a corner." Nadine filed a motion the next morning, a request for sanctions for harassment, a request for attorney fees, a request for a court order barring Caleb from contacting me or approaching my property. And she attached Brooke's evidence, not just the utility attempts, not just the residency notes, but something else. A spreadsheet, Caleb's spreadsheet, with my name, my house, and a column titled Leverage. My stomach turned when Nadine read it, leverage, like I wasn't a human being, like I was an obstacle to be moved. The hearing happened 3 weeks later. I walked into the courtroom with my folder and my spine straight. Caleb sat at the table with his attorney, wearing that polished suit again. He glanced at me, eyes cold. Brooke wasn't there, but her evidence was. Nadine presented everything: the attempted move-in, the police report, the utility fraud, the mail forwarding, the residency plan, the leverage spreadsheet. The judge, Honorable Daniel Reeves, was a middle-aged man with a tired face and eyes that sharpened with each new detail. Caleb's attorney tried to frame it as a misunderstanding between former spouses. Judge Reeves didn't buy it. He looked at Caleb and asked, "Mr. Ellison, did you instruct anyone to attempt to establish residency at Ms. Ellison's property without her consent?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He tried to smile. "Your Honor, I was just trying to..." Judge Reeves cut him off. "I didn't ask what you were trying to do. I asked what you did." Silence. Caleb's attorney shifted. Caleb swallowed. "I may have discussed options." Judge Reeves leaned forward. "Options," he repeated. "Like changing utility billing addresses in your ex-wife's name?" Caleb's face flushed. Judge Reeves continued. "Like planning to force a settlement through intimidation?" Caleb's smile died completely. Judge Reeves looked down at the documents, then back up. "This court will not tolerate harassment disguised as strategy," he said. My heart pounded. Judge Reeves issued an order. No contact, no approach within a certain distance. Any property retrieval must be scheduled through counsel with police standby. Sanctions, attorney fees. And then he said something that made Caleb's posture crack. "Mr. Ellison, if you continue this behavior, the next step will be contempt and potential criminal referral." Criminal referral. Caleb's eyes flickered. For the first time, I saw fear. Not fear of me, fear of consequences. Outside the courtroom, Caleb tried one last move. He walked close enough that Nadine stepped between us. His voice was low, furious. "You're ruining my life," he hissed. Nadine's voice was calm. "You did that." Caleb's eyes darted to me. I met his gaze and felt something settle, a quiet power. "You don't get to start over inside my home," I said softly. "You start over somewhere else." Caleb's face twisted. Then he turned and walked away. Weeks passed, then months. The street outside my house stayed quiet. No trucks, no surprise visits, no new numbers texting threats. And slowly, my body stopped flinching at every sound. The garden came back. The porch step still creaked. But now it sounded like mine again. I kept the cameras. I kept the paperwork folder. Not because I lived in fear, because I lived in reality. One evening in early fall, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. My stomach tightened automatically. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of Brooke's new lease, different address, different city, and a sticky note in neat handwriting. "Thank you. You saved me." I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it in my folder, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Sometimes the power reversal isn't you winning. Sometimes it's the system finally seeing the truth. because you refused to be quiet. Caleb tried to move his new wife into my home because he believed the house was still his stage. He believed he could replace me like furniture. He believed he could create residency with paperwork and pressure. But he forgot something. This wasn't his life anymore. And the moment he tried to turn my home into his strategy, I turned his strategy into evidence. That's the lesson I wish someone had told me years ago. If someone tries to invade your peace with confidence, don't meet them with emotion. Meet them with documentation. Meet them with boundaries that click shut. Meet them with consequences. Because some people only respect what the law can enforce and what you refuse to surrender. And once you learn that, your home stops being a place you defend. It becomes a place you stand in, unshakable, because it's yours, and it always was.